This afternoon, Goa time, we have with us Father Dr. RUDI HEREDIA SJ, uh, who is who has been described as someone who spent a lot of his time, someone who spent a lot of his time working on sociology and social activism in India and promoting a certain humanitarian vision of the same. So this afternoon, we have with us the author also of the book called Reconciling Differences. Reconciling Differences, and the subtitle is Beyond Collective Violence in India. So, Dr. Rudy, can you tell us what's about the book in brief?
Well, see, I would like to have the focus of the book on reconciliation. Now, I chose this topic because I felt we were living in a sea of violence. Everything is violent. The politics is violent. It's the politics of hate. You look at the newspapers. In civil society, there is so much crime going undetected. Rapes, caste crimes, lynchings, etc. So I thought this would be a topic to face head on. So I took this topic and I tried to research it as much as I could. So, we didn't start like this. The promise of Nehru in the Tryst with Destiny was very, very different and is put together in the preamble to the Constitution, which was, by the way, unanimously voted by the Constituent Assembly. There was no disagreement about that, and that is the basis of this book. So I talk in the first chapter. I'll give you a brief review of the chapters, and then I'll tell you what I want to focus on. I start with a brief review of promises broken, hopes betrayed. The kind of politics we are seeing now didn't begin all of a sudden. It was a gradual betrayal of the Nehruvian vision, and it began with the first emergency, which we did not oppose strongly enough. So naturally, the politicians assumed that the Indian people can easily be intimidated, and this is what the present political regime is trying to do. So you get arrested for anything that is interpreted by them as being a threat to the state. The Supreme Court had to intervene and said dissent is not a threat to the state. Democracy depends on dissent, but it still has to reach the administration. There are some states that are still arresting people if they complain about the lack of oxygen or they complain about non-functioning equipment in a hospital. Now, this is ridiculous. But one thing we have in our favor is that Indians and Indian democracy and the present regime likes to be perceived as democratic, as liberal, as favoring human rights. So once these things reach the international press, we begin to react. As soon as bodies were seen floating in the Ganga on international TV, then suddenly we geared up to tackle the COVID more seriously. Now, this is a pity. We should be more inner directed than other directed. Now, Indians are not usually other directed. We take our dharma from our caste, from our family, from our communities, etc. We do not have enough of swa dharma. We do not have a conscience that people can appeal to. And we have a strong tradition in this line. The Buddha was the first person to try and reform Indian society almost more than 2,500 years ago. And his saying was, his shibboleth was, be your own Buddha. You know. And in fact, the Zen Buddhists say if you meet the Buddha, kill him. Because you must create your own Buddha. You have to be responsible for yourself. You cannot transfer that responsibility onto others. I think this is at the root cause of our political issue with democracy.
Rudy, let me interrupt you here if you don't mind. I know that the chapters are very interesting and we have to go through them, one after the other. But just to create a kind of a gentle introduction to the reader, when I encountered your book, I know you're a prominent sociologist, but there is an element of history, there is an element of political science in this book. Would I be right to say that also?
Well, I would place this book in the social sciences because everything is interdisciplinary now. You just can't isolate one discipline for the other. So history is involved, sociology, politics, religious studies, etc., etc. You know.
Of course, we'll go to your chapters, and I really want you to discuss those also. But to start off at the gentle end of the pool, this is your which book? Fifth, fourth, more?
Well, see, this is part of a series of three. The first was on changing God, which was on the issue of conversion. That was very, very important at that time. You know, 1 minute, there's
Don't
something.
worry, don't worry.
I've cut the call. Very important at that time.
Which year? Which time?
The issue of religious conversion. So the
Which
book
year?
was it was published in 2012. All very recently, actually. No, 2007. Okay. Then I followed that up with the next issue on reservations and quotas because I found every middle class family that had a child in the 12th standard was against reservations no matter what they came from. But this is an issue of justice which we will never solve without some affirmative action. Every country is getting into affirmative action. When it comes to gender, then all the women are for affirmative action. When it comes to caste and so on, then none of them are. This is very strange. I found I would always get a discussion going in the class at St. Xavier when I put this question of gender justice, and the women were all on one side and the men were all on the other. So when the issue touches us, when the issue, I'll just cut this phone off. Uh, when the issue touches us, then of course we are concerned with it. So that was called taking sides, reservation quotas, and affirmative action. Okay. Then the third one was this book on violence, which I thought was now becoming a serious problem in our country. And it really is. I mean, if you look at the crime rates in India, they are very, very high and they're not all officially registered. So, I mean, look at the difference in the society I grew up in. We could travel by public transport freely, unaccompanied, when I was 13 years old. Will any parent let a 13-year-old go to school by public transport unaccompanied? It's changed, and we have allowed it to change. We went after the wrong goals. School was concerned with getting high marks. Whether you got it by cheating or not, it didn't matter. So you see, we did not have a strong swadharma on all these issues. So this is how we broke promises and betrayed hopes. So we speak now of internal colonialism. We have got rid of British Raj and we have replaced it, according to Thomas Piketty and his co-editor, co-author Thomas Clancy, in an article which I read. We have replaced it with billionaire Raj, from British Raj to billionaire Raj. So they say that 4 billionaires rule India. There is Ambani, Adani, Piramal, and of course one more. I think it is Tata's. So how will you get a really democratic society of liberty, equality, and justice with this kind of a politics? Now, what is happening today has built on the past. And if we don't oppose it soon, if we have another 5 years of this, the damage may be too great to reverse. I think just now we need a generational change. It's going to take a generation to reverse what has been done. Okay, so I'm very clear about this.
So Rudy, I'm happy that anyone encountering this interview would also know that Rudi Heredia has many sides to him and has been a teacher at professor at St. Xavier's College and has written on a range of subjects. So like they would encounter your many different aspects. But I was just searching through Google Scholar and I came to know that you had written books on all kinds of subjects, including in the 80s, late 80s, on voluntary action and development towards a praxis for non-governmental agencies. What is your range of interest? I mean, obviously it has evolved over the years, but could you give us a hint of that?
See, I started getting into research because I had a degree that was strong in research from the University of Chicago. So I thought we should add a reflection dimension to our action. Otherwise, what we get is ad hocism. A problem comes, we find a solution. But it doesn't solve the underlying fractures and the underlying templates of our society. We need serious reflections in order not to repeat mistakes. We never reflected enough on the emergency the first time it came up. It's come up again, in the same generation. We never armed ourselves with strong social institutions of justice, of a strong electoral commission. We allow them to be corrupted little by little because it didn't affect us. You remember Niemöller's thing. First they came for the Jews. Now they're going to come for us. And I think our education systems have failed. They have not educated the students in order to have this kind of swadharma, to be critical. A small state like Goa is just like the others, only not as violent as Bihar, but the politics is not very different. Or now, of course, UP is overtaking Bihar. So let me come to the second chapter.
Yes, please.
See, we have to rediscover our real history. Now, history, one thing that Wendy Doniger said, that in India, even the past is uncertain because the past seems to recreate itself. Everybody rewrites history. And there's a whole project of the Hindutvavadis to rewrite history. Now, this is very dangerous, when every nation rewrites history, but they rewrite it in terms of the ruling class. So when it was the Soviets, Stalin wrote a whole new history of Russia. Mao wrote a whole new history of China. Hitler wrote a whole new history of Berlin and the Deutschland, über alles, Deutschland, über alles, over the other. So we have to be careful, and a critical sense must also extend to looking at history. We are trying to reinstate figures that don't really belong to the line of Indian heroes, like someone like Veer Savarkar. There is a new book out by Vikram Sampath, and he is very suave, very clever, very well read, very well researched, and very, very dangerous to my mind. Because he makes Savar look acceptable. Whereas Savarkar is precisely the ideology that is driving this politics of hate. Now, the RSS also is moving away from it because it's becoming counterproductive. I think we should take them up on that and rewrite our history perhaps with an independent agency of more professional historians,
Father, before you go to the next, could I request you to please center yourself on the camera a little bit? Yeah, the other side, no, the other. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So carry on, please. Sorry.
So we have to rediscover our history. We have to rediscover Gandhi and Tagore, not the old Gandhi and Tagore, but the Gandhi and Tagore and Maulana Azad and so on for today. One of the key ideas of Gandhi and Tagore and Azad was that Indian civilization is different from the West. It is not premised on competition. It is premised on cooperation. But the cooperation we chose were a hierarchical cooperation of caste. And there was peace in the country because everybody accepted the hierarchy. Now you put in democracy and numbers begin to count. And as soon as the census pointed out who were the largest caste, the dominant caste, etc., the whole consensus on hierarchy began to break down and new ones are being formed. And they are being formed on the basis of the dominant caste. And what is dangerous is that caste and class are coming together so that the upper caste and the upper class are just one. The CSDS did a survey on who controls the media, and they found it was an embarrassing result because so many people belong to upper classes and upper caste and related to one another. It's like a family tree, all the Sardesais and the Dutts and the others are all interconnected. But where are the lower caste? Where do the poor have voice and choice in this country? This is what the question that we should ask ourselves. This is the question that Amartya Sen poses in his capability approach to justice, the idea of justice. We are betraying the preamble of the Constitution, but it's good that NGOs are trying to bring it back. Okay, so that is about rediscovering our history and how important it is. We have to make sure that the next generation learns what is we consider to be, as a consensus, the correct history. Otherwise, we are going to be lost. Okay.
A
Now,
lot of specific examples in your text in that sense.
yeah, well, one I gave you is Savarkar. The other is Gandhi. You know, the present regime tried to discredit Gandhi, but then they found they simply could not. You remember one of the Salvis shot a statue of, effigy of Gandhi, and she was praised. You know, that is kind of recreating the Gandhi murder. See, even the textbooks, and one of the textbooks ends with in Gujarat on Gandhi, and then he died, as though it was a natural death in bed or something. It was a murder. The whole world knows that, but the next generation of Indians will not know that. So here is another example. Then the reinstatement of Savarkar. He was heavily involved with Godse. They were his chelas. But now suddenly they are denying it. He was not a member of the RSS because he was too political for the RSS at that time. So here are two examples. You can give many, many more of how we are trying to recreate our own history, which I think is most unfortunate because you know, we will betray ourselves. We will betray ourselves there. Satyameva Jayate. Let us try and discover together in a collective effort what was truly important in the Indian past and carry that forward. And
So
I think
your point is that there are many visions of India and about India.
there are many visions, and they are good and bad. And the idea of India, which originated in Tagore, comes together in a very beautiful collection of ideological themes. And both the art and the politics and everything was kind of put together in the idea of India. And the best example of that is the preamble of the Constitution.
No, but doctor, how would you respond to the charge, for example, that we are stuck in that one vision and we are not allowing scope for change, and the people want it, and it's a different vision. So, how would you respond to that kind of
See,
argument?
this is exactly what the Nazis said. They said the Germans have been humiliated. They want a strong leader. They want someone who will correct the wrong image of Germany. Germany was clearly the dominant nation in Europe, okay? But Britain played the game of balance of power and kept them in the dark. But how do you break that thing into a new era? Finally, after a world war where 60 million people died, and counting, finally the European Union has managed to keep war away from the major nations in Europe. And if you notice, the dominant nation in the European Union is Germany. So once Germany has found her place, then there is peace in Europe. So in India, we should think of the same thing, that once the federation, once the union finds their place and begins to function together, there will be peace. In fact, Vajpayee proposed this idea of a South Asian Union, of all the nation states becoming one union, like the European Union. They took 500 years of religious wars and 2 world wars to reach this state, and God knows how many they killed, finally to realize that there is no end to this kind of mass killing. And then they come together with the European Union. And it was France and Germany that pushed it. Now Britain is beginning to question the idea. Okay, there are tensions and so on, but we'll have to see. Can we have a union of South Asia? And if India is too large a group in it and will dominate, and people are afraid of dominating, we could have the states of India as individual members of that union. Maharashtra one, Uttar Pradesh divided into three, another, Tamil Nadu another one, all of them with equal vote in the union. Like the European Union, there are 22 states, now 21 with Britain having left, and there is peace. Even those who are not in the union are at peace, like Norway and Switzerland and so on, because the major players must not be antagonistic to the other. And
I'm 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 getting your argument, Rudy, but I'm missing out on half your face. So if you center yourself on the camera, no, the other side, the other side. Yeah, then it's perfect. Then it's perfect. So the viewer can see full of you, all of you.
let me say by way of comic relief, my argument is more important than my face.
Okay, okay, but yeah, but it adds up. It all adds up. So chapter 3 argument is
By
religionizing
see,
violence. Okay.
once you
So no, no. My question is that you are a man of religion, okay, and all religions have their own violent past or present or future or whatever, including Christianity for that matter. So
correct.
how do you put it across in that sense?
See, once religion gets politicized, it betrays itself. This is the story of the Crusades. Why did the popes emphasize the Crusades? You know, the Crusades were terrible jihadis. Terrible. I mean, there were popes preaching. Saint Benedict, Saint Bernard preached, kill a Muslim and go to heaven. Exactly what the jihadi is saying. He preached this in a homily. It was a political issue. How can that be a religious issue of a Christian who, in the beginning of their foundation in the early centuries, refused to fight? That's why the Roman Empire did not trust them, and that's one of the reasons for the persecution. Because they felt these fellows will not defend the empire. They will benefit by it, but they will not defend it because they don't believe in it. It's after the 4th or 5th century when the barbarian hordes started coming in that Christians realized we have to defend ourselves. We have to defend this place. So I think once religion gets politicized, it betrays itself. Now, Hinduism was never fully political. The Brahmin and the Kshatriya were separate. But once now it is politicized. In democracy, only those who have political power are the new Brahmins, and they overlap with the old Brahmins and Kshatriyas, and now they're overlapping with the upper caste. So religion is getting politicized in India and is very dangerous. And this is the essential danger of Savarkar. One of his sayings in the Hindu Mahasabha was, religionize all politics, uh, militarize Hindudom. We use the word Hindu, militarize Hindudom. So it's another crusade, you know. And the crusades ended up in such a mess. Who won the crusades? Nobody knows. The crusades were really ended when the Mongols invaded Egypt and the Arabs over there, but they were defeated. So it took it took one more century for them for the crusade, those wars to end. And finally, the dominant power was once again Islam.
You made a point also, Rudy, that religion can be a very emotive force, a very strong force, possibly a very negative force.
It can be positive and negative. There's always an abuse of religion. You can take the devotion of a Mother Teresa. Even that is misinterpreted. You must remember that Jesus Christ is the only leader of a religious tradition that died in failure. The remarkable thing is that he proved the worth of suffering by actually undergoing suffering. Now, this should be the basic insight of Christians: to be martyred, to be witnessed, to be a witness to truth and love, to be killed rather than to kill. But Christians are quite adept as killing as the other once it gets politicized.
Yeah,
You know,
depends which example from which part of the world we take. So it can be quite a.
No, I mean, now there is no official Christian state anymore, really. So they are all non-Christians. I mean, in name, yes, but it's very
But
difficult.
that doesn't stop a Donald Trump from claiming the right to speak on behalf of religion and push his version
See, religion
on
has
half the world.
a tradition that always gets corrupted by the bureaucracy and mainly by the clergy. Mainly by the clergy. You know what Bernard Shaw says in his introduction to St. John? All reforming popes have been the scourge of the clergy, because they are the ones that need reforming first. And Pope Francis is trying, and I hope he succeeds, but he may not. He may be one more reforming pope whose reformation will get reversed. Okay? So let us separate the basic charisma, the essential message of religion. See, Buddhism has a message of peace, of tolerance, and yet what is happening in Myanmar? What is happening in Sri Lanka?
Sri
What
Lanka.
is happening in Thailand? It's getting politicized. What happened in Cambodia? So once religion gets politicized, it betrays itself. And this is the danger of Savarkar. He's politicizing Hinduism, which was never politicized. And this was in reaction to Islam getting politicized, with starting with the Muslim League, you know. And the British, of course, divide and rule was great for them, you know. Gandhi was quite right. He said, better a civil war than this partition. You know, the Americans learned that lesson when they had their civil war, but still they could not put an end to slavery. It survives in all different ways. So don't believe that Trump is gone, but Trumpism is alive still, you know, in the Republican Party.
Comprehending violence.
So see, I understand violence very simply like this. Violence is violation of a person. You know, violence is not simply physical violence. Nature is violent. Storms are there, you know, wildfires are there, you know, cyclones are there. Those are violent events. But that is natural violence, you know. It's not morally significant, you know, in itself, okay, in the damage it does, etc. It is morally significant. But essentially, violence is violation of a person. So this can have done at the physical level, at the psychological level, and in very different arenas, you know. So it's difficult to define violence, you know. It's easier to describe it. And I think one of the insights of Gandhi and even of Amartya Sen is, let us not try simply to define a just society. Let us rather know the injustice and try to put an end to that. Because to define a just society, it requires a comprehensive vision, which is very difficult for us to have because we do not see the whole picture. Similarly with violence, it's very difficult to know. It's very difficult to describe a non-violent society. But we know the violations of human rights and of human beings. Let us begin by stopping those. You know, the kingdom of God is always in the future. Ram Raja will not come with a Ram temple. You know, it will come after that. You know, similarly, the nirvana that the Buddha promises for those who are enlightened will come afterwards. You know, so it's always in the future, but it's a future that must begin now. You know, so in comprehended violence, I'm very clear that I consider it to be violation, you know, essentially violation. Wherever we find violation done to a human being, we are violating the dignity of a person, and we must try and stop it, you know. So but you know, it's a complicated issue. You know, what is defensive violence? You know, even the Jains had warrior monks, because defense becomes a critical issue. You know, should we just lay down our lives and die? You know, see, turning the other cheek for the Christian is an ideal, just as the Beatitudes are an ideal. That's the ideal we should hold ourselves as and judge ourselves by. But it's not a legal norm. It cannot be. It's too difficult. You know, it's too difficult because human beings are fragile. I want to go to the next chapter, Interlocuting Gandhi. See, it's very easy to criticize Gandhi. We question Gandhi. Now, here is what I mean by rethinking our original vision. Let Gandhi question us. Imagine a conversation with Gandhi, which that Gandhi liked, no? The one that became very popular. What was it called? The film on Gandhi with Amir Khan acting the role. You know, very, very. It was a very. It moved many people to tears. But that was only with Gandhi's devotion to truth. But Gandhi, you know, Gandhi wanted to nationalize lawyers and doctors in his ideal vision, because he said we should all work for the common good, not for private profit. You know, his vision of society was one of a large joint family. Now, of course, that is again not exactly practical in the complexities of a modern society, but at least it's an ideal we could hold up. So let Gandhi question us. What would Gandhi say to our hate politics today? Tell me. What would Gandhi say to the way we treat minorities today? What would Gandhi say about cow lynching, of lynching, what do they call them, vigilante lynching? Let him question us. We put him on our money. It's the last place he should be. you know. And we imagine an opposition between Vallabhbhai Patel and Gandhi, and we build statues to Vallabhbhai Patel. But if we allow Gandhi to question us sincerely, we might come up with another vision which is more practical. But it has to be a consensus. It took a long time. The freedom movement of India was one of the longest and largest mass movements in the world. It begins after 1857, in C, and it comes together only in 1947. So these are long-term investments. We want instant coffee, instant freedom, instant democracy. We are not going to get it, especially when we add the wrong ingredients to sweeten the coffee and make it more bitter and more poisonous than it actually is. Okay. Now I talk about in the 6th chapter the spiraling violence. See, violence breeds violence. If I am violent and I treat others violently, then their self-defense also has to be violent. So we must reverse the cycle of violence, and our justice system doesn't help us because our justice system is based on retribution, not on restoration. We need a whole new idea of justice, So, and this I pick up from the Truth and Justice Commission of South Africa.
Does it exist somewhere, this new vision of justice?
That the whole Truth and Justice Commission was based on that. Truth telling truth telling openly, honestly, under questioning, and no legal procedure against you. Because they realized there were too many cases to pursue within the justice system. They would have taken them many, many decades to go through them, But it focused only on political reconciliation, on human rights. It did not focus on economic rights, and that is one of its limitations. They thought, let us do what we can. And how did it begin? It began when the white dominance, especially the white capitalists, began to feel the pinch of being isolated and no new investment from abroad coming in and no new markets for their goods. It began with a boycott. When the boycott was spearheaded by young students in the universities. I must say I'm very proud that Georgetown had a key role to play in spearheading this boycott. When they realized that, they found it among themselves. They came to Mandela. They came to the ANC and said, let's have a settlement because this is going to end with the destruction of war. Everybody was predicting a bloodbath in South Africa like happened in Haiti, especially after the killing of police murder of Stephen Biko. But Mandela was a man who was not for revenge. He was larger than that. He wanted a rainbow South Africa, And truly, he's the last statesman that is left standing in South Africa. And without him, this may not happen. And they put together an economic agreement that in the new society, private properties would be respected. Now, that is, in a way, the lesser evil, because the class system still prevails in South Africa. But they did not want to make the mistake that happened in Zimbabwe, where all the farms and all the private properties of the whites were nationalized, and then they ended up in an economic and mess, and that led to a political mess, a dictatorship finally, which was very ruthless. So he was very clever. He worked with the Afrikaners. And he pointed out to the Afrikaners in jail, do you realize that you are doing the dirty work for the Anglos? Who are the guards in this jail? All Afrikaners. The whites, the Anglos will not come here. This is dirty work. They will not come here. So you are also exploited. So let us get together and change this whole thing. And then they started treating him as a human being, and he would help wash the dishes with his guard. He was not supposed to, because he was a privileged prisoner. But he started establishing a equality with the Afrikaners already in jail. And that is how it was possible to have this Truth and Reconciliation, Truth and Justice Commission, which led to reconciliation. Now, that was a turning point. It did not solve all the problems, but at least it opened a new path. And I think what India needs now is a number of truth and reconciliation commissions. We do have these Jan Sunwais, but they have no political or sanction or clout. So we can say what we like there, and they can be ignored. We have a human rights commission that shouts itself hoarse against the abuse of human rights, but they are not bound to listen. The South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, all parties committed to following it. All the Afrikaners, the Anglos, and the blacks. All, even the Zulus. So that was a turning point, and this is what I think is the way forward. That is why I want to emphasize that we need an Ubuntu for India. Ubuntu is about focusing on the community. I am because we are. Ubuntu is for healing the wound that injustice has caused,
It's a
not
different
for.
vision. It's a different vision, which you also make the point about, where we don't see someone else as an enemy, but we see them as someone who's just different and has a right to be different, and they stay in their space, and we try to understand that.
Yeah, see, there are different ways you can look at the other. I can look at the other as my opposite. Because the other always puts a question for me. It happens even in gender. Why are men so hostile to women? Because women pose a question to them. you know, and men are afraid of that question, and women are jealous of men's power. This is what Freud points out, and he came out with penis envy and and penis anxiety, and he tried to resolve it with his Oedipus complex. Okay, but that is at a sub-psychological level. That I don't know how much truth there is in that, but it's a very powerful myth of how the different other becomes a threat to us. So if we treat the other as a threat, then we are going to only rule by power. One must dominate the other, otherwise it won't work. If we treat the other as my complement, okay, that's still not enough, because only when we can exchange, this is what a contractual justice is about. I give you something, you give me something, and the exchange is good for both of us, but the exchange is never equal. So it's to instrumentalize the other. We can go a step further and treat the other as my ethical responsibility. I am responsible for my brother, just as a parent is responsible for their child, and just as a child must be responsible for their parents as they get older. This is a family model, but it can be extended to the larger society. One of the philosophers called Goodin, Goodin, tries to make a case for this, on degrees of responsibility, depending on degrees of trust and dependency. But I can go one step further, which is the Christian vision, which is the Bodhisattva's vision, which is the Sufi vision, to treat the other as my fulfillment. So by relating to the other, by coming close to the other, by loving the other, I fulfill myself, you know, and together we become larger, we become more human. Now, let me say this, that Ubuntu is also found in all tribal societies. Justice as restoration, not as revenge, not as people of, well, not as revenge, So, tribal societies, the community counts more than the individual simply. Now we have emphasized the individual, so that I am amazed that sometimes, people, even good people, they want justice, they want that man to be killed. Will that bring the murderer, the murdered person back to life? It will perpetuate the cycle of murder, it will perpetuate the cycle of revenge. And our justice system is based precisely on an adversarial system. The prosecution and the defense fight with each other verbally in court, and the judge is the referee. This is Anglo-Saxon justice. But the victim is never involved in this. The poor victim sits there and watches. What does the victim want? Now, if we have a society where restorative justice is once again premiered and foregrounded, then perhaps we can read, and the tribals will teach us this. We will not learn this from the present legal system. We will not learn this from our law school and our law courts. Though now they are beginning to see the limitations of the legal system. There's something beyond that. And this is what I end up is that we need a healing touch. We need somewhere to begin to forgive, because there is so much hurt, and political healing is very difficult. It's really very difficult. But without healing, there is no reconciliation, there is no forgiveness, there is no harmony. So we have to go this whole gamut and begin with ourselves, at least opening to the one, to my neighbor. As Gandhi said, we need a new civilizational culture. And we have the beginnings of this, or at least a model for this, with our own Adivasis. But Ubuntu is essentially a tribal culture. Essentially, it is not a modern culture. Modern society is premised on the individual, or on profit and on competition. And you can see how destructive these are, in spite of all the obfuscation that the capitalists might do.
So Rudy, now that we have got the book out of the way, which is a big job, and I think it came out only in April this year, and it's come from Speaking Tiger under the Speaking Tiger brand, and it's available in the market and things like that. Uh, Tell us a bit about your teaching of sociology, particularly at St. Xavier's, Mumbai, which is a prestigious college.
Well, I'll tell you my first experience, which I think about and always laugh, and it kind of marked my teaching right through. The first day I was teaching, I was in my late 20s. Many of the students were in their early 20s. So there was much, and I used to look very young, which was not an advantage then. So I wanted to make sure I was in the right class. So I stood at the door and asked the first student, the girl sitting in the first row, "Is this the sociology class?" And she said, "Yes, sit down. The teacher hasn't come." So I said, "I am the teacher." "Oh," she said, "you're the teacher," looking me up and down. And she turned to the class and said, "Hey guys, he's our teacher." And I got a big clap and a cheer, and that was a terrible way to start. So I realized I will never be, I have to be a friend to these people, otherwise I will never be they never will listen to me. They would treat me as an equal, and I might have become a friend, so that we are, more or less, considerate to each other. Because, students can be very, very cruel sometimes. So
I've
that
met
was,
I've met your students who have fond memories and say that Rudy was quite a liberal, and he would allow us to even launch a protest if it was against the college and the management and things like that. He would try to understand us rather
well,
than.
no, I did not encourage them, I conscientized them. Now, students have an innate sense of justice. This is not fair. So I used Paulo
Paulo
Freire,
Freire. Paulo
Paulo
Freire.
Freire a lot, in my thinking and so on. And Paulo Freire is always for reconciliation. He says we must not hate the other, we must change the other. You know, we must conscientize the other just as we conscientize ourselves. But now often they would take this thing to the local issues. So when there's a strike in the canteen, and really as an outsider, it was an unfair strike. It was a strike over some of the waiters stealing one egg. That is ridiculous. But they wanted to make it a symbol, you know, a symbol of discipline, you know. So, but you don't use that. The union leader came to say, "What are you doing?" I said, "Look, I'm not in charge. I don't have anything to." But the students sided with the waiters. But then I told the senior father, "You asked me to conscientize them, and conscientization means that they will ask these questions and do these things." I often meet students who years after come to me and say, "You taught me." So now I'm a little careful. My response is, "Was it a good experience?" And they would give that Indian head wiggle, which was more than ambiguous. You don't know what they are saying. So, and then they would say, "You taught us things that we cannot practice. You spoiled my life." So I said, "Well, I'm sorry about that." Then I asked them, "Would you have wanted it to be different?" And they think for a while and say, "No." See, students when they are young, they can grasp an idea, even though it's hard to put into practice. This is where our education is failing. all our education institutions are focused on examination results. Now, all of us agree that exams are irrelevant, and we are very good. Christian institutions are very good at exams, you know. So, are we irrelevantly excellent or excellently irrelevant? This is the question that we must answer. So you find a nation like Finland that has no exams, no syllabus, no subjects. They just focus on issues and problems, and they are the best educated school children in the world, according to all international tests. So can't we do something like that? Can't we at least imitating like that? You know, but we run up. So I felt that you must learn by doing, you must learn by problem solving, you know, and knowledge isolated from reality is really not worth it. You know.
Rudy, I'd like to read a tribute that your publishers chose to carry in your book. Someone saying this about you, Anaya Vajpayee, author of Righteous Republic, The Political Foundations of Modern India, and just a line from it where she calls you a passionate advocate for peace, communal harmony, and the equal rights of all citizens. Rudolf Heredia has spent half a century bringing a moral conscience to the social sciences and scholarly rigor to social activism. So, in that sense, Rudy, in terms of sociology, what would you see as the unfinished agenda of sociology in India? Of course, it's huge, but what are the main things? If I had to ask you for a list of three, a short list of three things which need to be worked on critically at this point.
See, I think one thing is to train our people to be critical. To be critical doesn't mean to criticize. It means to judge by some standard, okay? And it must be a fair standard, and it must be a fair criticism. That's the first thing. The second thing, teach them to be independent. You know, that is not to be persons in community, not individuals in isolation. You know, and then the third thing, we must create communities of persons. That is, you know, caste is not a community of persons, it's a community of hierarchies where not every person is equal. If we create a community of persons, all would be equal, functionally different. But just because, you know, and this was, it's a Gandhian idea, but it's also a very ethical idea. And it goes back to Christianity. And it goes back to every major religious tradition. Just because you are different, it doesn't mean you're unequal. You don't have to be similar to be equal, you know, because in a complex society, we have to be functionally differentiated. But can we make those functions equal in dignity, not just verbally, but you know, in practice actually, you know.
I was surprised the other day when I realized that you had just touched 80, and being a priest and part of the Jesuits, you were celebrating it with a mass, which I saw on Facebook. And of course, you've always, as you mentioned yourself, you've always had this very boyish look to you, even which you retain at 80, which is fine and perfect. And I remember encountering you the first time at Goa University. This was in 1986, 87, 88, maybe. I don't remember the exact year, and there was a conference on sociology or some such subject, Goa futurology or something of that sort. And I didn't know you then. Of course, we subsequently became acquaintances, friends, and beyond. But I was surprised by the short intervention you made at the end of the seminar, which was quite a powerful intervention. I still remember it at that, though I don't remember the points made, to be honest. What next? What are your upcoming projects in terms of writing? I know we are all grappling with health and other issues, but what next?
Well, the first thing I'm working on presently is putting my papers together. They are in such a mess because I was always in such a hurry and busy with so many things. Someone is helping me to sort that out. So whatever is useful, I will try and put into various folders, various themes, and put it digitally and make it available to whoever would like to look at it. That's one. Then I have an idea to write on a book, if I ever get to it, on tolerating the intolerable, you know, uh, pollution and prejudice in India. You know, this idea of pollution runs very deep in the Indian mind, you know, and in the Indian culture. You know, in fact, uh, Dumont makes it the basis of caste, purity, and pollution. You know, so dirt is simply matter in the wrong place. You change the place of dirt and it becomes manure, it becomes fertilizer, it becomes all sorts of things. In the earth, in a different place, it becomes the promoter of disease. So we've mixed this up. you know we've mixed up the idea of pollution, and it's ingrained in our prejudice. So I'd like to write something on that if I can, but that's still a project, more than it's still a project to be formulated. And
Interesting. One last question. Any contact or email address that someone could contact you on if they'd like to?
yes, you can contact me at rudiheredia@gmail.com. All lowercase, continuous. RUDI, not Y, please.
Yeah.
RUDIHEREDIA, Rudy Heredia, continuous lowercase, at gmail.com.
So I'm curious. You were always among the Jesuits. You were always in the Bombay province, never in Goa. I think because your family has been Bombay based, right?
No, because I joined the Bombay province, but I spent quite a lot of time in Delhi at the Indian Social Institute, because I was assigned there, and that is more a research institute, because here it's very difficult. I started the Social Science Center, which was precisely to bring the reflection dimension to our action.
At
But
Xavier's. At Xavier's.
at Xavier's, yeah. But with the full teaching load, I used to spend the weekdays in class, the weekends in the field, and the rest of the time in the canteen getting to know the students. So it became too much, you know. It became too much. My health was really breaking down, so I needed a break. Then I got a research assistant, Ashley Tellis, who was a
Who's gone on to greater things? Who's gone on to far greater things?
well, I don't know if they are greater. They're definitely bigger.
Bigger. Greater in the sense of power. Yes.
Yeah, but he was more popular with the students than I was because he was younger and more handsome.
So some of the people you worked with and remember from your sociology days. Um,
Yeah,
I know you mentored a whole lot of people, and
well,
many of them fondly remember that. But some of the names whom you
well,
remember.
George Jose now, who is a teacher in the Gulf somewhere, you know, uh, uh, Iyer, Anant Iyer, who now he's passed away. He was a teacher abroad somewhere. Well, I offhand, and there were many. There were quite a few, because the Social Science Center was a kind of nest of opposition to the standard Xavier culture. But I think it was a true representative of the critical Xaviers. There was a sense of freedom. I would never give a solution. I would ask them to find a solution, and argue among yourselves. And one of my best experiences was on affirmative action on gender justice, where always the argument would never end, because the women were on one side and the men were on the other. But I think they learned more that way to respect each other.
Thank you so much, Rudy, for all your time and this interesting download and review of your book in a oral and video form. Really grateful and wishing you a lot more of work and research. And I know you're a busybody from your current station in Mumbai. Thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to some other further interaction. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm grateful for all those of you who are listening to this. And I hope you have it recorded and you put it on YouTube so I can send it to some of my
Yes,
friends.
yes, very much. That will definitely happen, and I'll send you the link soon.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay,
Thank you.
okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
very
Have
much.
a nice. Have